Hi everybody, I have another farm I want to show you quick. I was working on this and I was thinking I was going to make it a little bit cleaner so it's not such a redstone mess, but the .70 update that's going to be coming out in a while is going to make it so that this particular version won't be able to be built. So I wanted to show it to you right now. Now I've got my son's account in there with an auto clicker, or it'll work with a console just holding down the place button, and you'll see that it's summoned in a whole bunch of withers. If I move over here, you'll see they're all getting trapped inside one of the small gateways, and then we have TNT being dispensed up into here, and it's killing off all of the withers. Now this normally would be a full cube, but I've got some barrier blocks so that we can see through this one wall. There you go. See, that happened. And our player is under here because we need to collect the experience from the withers. If we're not collecting the experience, the experience will actually push the next batch out, and they'll escape. So that's why the player's under here. So you do need some decent armor with mending and unbreaking on it. That way the experience will keep your armor from breaking. And you will also want to have a regen beacon in the area. But this setup here that he's working on, I have run these dispensers completely dry a couple times without having any problems or issues. So I believe that this is safe as long as you have no more than 10 withers at a time, is what I'm going to say is safe. This right here is 12 withers because there's 12 TNT, so that's what I've been testing it as. But when going up to 20 or near 20, you start running the risk of one of them just breaking this cobblestone at the wrong time, and you just get unlucky, and eventually you might have an escape. You could pack up to 40 withers in here, but once you start getting that many, they start being able to blow up everything outside of this. So if you're gonna walk away from the computer, no more than 10. But we are dealing with withers here, so don't walk away from the computer. Use at your own risk. 10 withers, if half of them escape, maybe you can recover from that and rebuild. 20 withers, if they start escaping after the first 5, that's 15 withers and you're going to have to relocate. Yeah. So that's that setup there. That's the fully AFK version. I had this one over here before I figured out the XP thing, where the player would stand here and summon them in. So it's a little bit faster, I think, on the summoning. But once I figured out the XP, I went and I put a reset button. So between each batch, the player has to run up here so that they're collecting the XP from being above it, because the XP pickup range is, I believe, 8 blocks vertically. And then again, on this one here, we've got some droppers with that determines how many withers we're going to summon. And over here, we've got droppers determining the number of withers we're going to summon. I've got a few signs kind of labeling what everything does. And then when you're done with these two versions, because nether stars will not despawn and they will not blow up, you would swim down this water, come in here, pick up your nether stars, and you can get into swim mode in case they've tucked themselves into corners. Just try not to get trapped. See, this is continuing to work just fine by itself over here without me. Technically, 11 TNT is all you need if you get the correct timings, but there is the odd time when the TNT would maybe not blow up exactly at their feet, or something would stop them from taking damage once, so I'm using 1 extra TNT. Anyways, that is the, I guess, showcase of the farm. So I will go and show you how to build this thing here, and then at the end of the video I will show you this one here that does not use any TNT, because this one is for kind of future-proofing when we're not able to remove this bedrock and this bedrock. So the withers will suffocate, which is obviously much slower, but also we could do more than 4, no more than 4 with this one at a time. Any more than 4 and you are very likely to start having them escape, and then they'll push each other out. So this one is not at all relog proof. Do not run this thing if you're anywhere close to a server restart. But this one here is relog proof. So once they have settled into that corner, they're not going to escape. So maybe if you're unlucky and the server restarts right as they first spawn, maybe they'll escape. But other than just pure chance, it is relog proof. Okay. Well, let's shut this down and we'll get into the build tutorial. Actually, before we get into the build tutorial, I should probably cover how to actually use these things, and then I'll review the bits and pieces as far as how it works, and then that way, if you're just following the structure files that I'll provide, you don't necessarily need the build tutorial, but I will still run through the building at least this one here. From there, you'll be able to sort out how to do these other two if you want them. So anyways, once we come in here, the player has to stand down in here. I've got the little floor, and we have an on-off switch. So it won't ever push soul sand up without this switch on. And then the player has to stand right in here. Now, we have our crystal here and our iron trapdoor, and these just keep us from having much room that all the explosions can push us around, and this keeps us from flying away. That way we're staying right in position to always hit this piston, and also we're close enough that we're always going to be collecting the experience from the withers. And then you just hold down the place button, or use an auto clicker, or however you want to work it, and run until well, either you're out of soul sand, out of skulls, or feel like you've done enough for the day. There. And you'll see it started placing again right away once the withers were dead. I'll come out here and I'll click that switch. So if you had a bunch packed up here and it was just waiting for the TNT, you'd flick that and it wouldn't summon another wither on you after you've walked away. I'm going to come over here and just kill the withers so we don't have to deal with them. Over here in this one, as you can see, you stand here. Again, we've got a block above your head to keep you from bouncing, and I've got some full blocks just to try and reduce the explosion damage. But again, you stand just the same as before, and you hold down the button to place it. This time, once they've all exploded, this here pressure plate moves this barrel, so that's going to prevent it from spawning more if you're not standing there. But also, there is a separate circuit here that will prevent it from spawning more until you've come up and you've pressed that button. We can simulate that here by telling the system that we have summoned, spawned all of the withers, and then it's running through its timer for the spawn cycle, and we'll have the TNT show up here shortly. Okay, now you'll see this line has turned off, and it is preventing our power from here coming through, because it's this power that will activate our little dispenser there and allow the system to cycle. So you see we come up here, we collect our experience, and we push that button. So now it'll be ready to start another batch. And on both of these, there's not really a good way of getting the nether stars out, but because they don't despawn and they can't blow up, you just come in here and you pick them up. And then you swim out your column of water here. And you can see in the course of the recording that we've done here so far, when I had my son AFK, and just this little bit now, I've already gotten over 2 stacks of stars. And then we have our soul sand that, storage here, and as you place it, it spits more soul sand out at you so that you'll never run out of soul sand. So you just kind of have like a half a stack in your hand, and as you place it, you'll get fed more. This version over here, it's much easier to have your skulls with a lot of extra bulk storage above them and be fed in. On this one, you could accomplish that by putting hoppers in like this, and then moving your obsidian up here to keep things from moving, and then you can have some wither skulls like this, extra bulk storage, just in case you happen to have more than a full chest of skulls that you were wanting to do at one time. And again, you got your soul sand storage right here, and your TNT input is over here. So with this thing, you need, if you're running at 12 withers, you would need 1 TNT per skull in one of these dispensers here. So this barrel would do 3 separate fillings of your dispensers, but you can always add more hoppers over here and a larger TNT storage if you're going to be running for a long time. And you do want to make sure that for however large the batches of withers you're doing, that TNT is not what you run out of first. So I suppose I could put in a comparator to tell when this hopper gets empty as a bit of a buffer. But if you've got TNT in this barrel, you've got a dropper here that's also full. Okay. So that's how to use those two. This one over here, that is the suffocation damage one, is basically the same as that one over there. You just stand in your spot here, the trapdoor up, and place the withers. It's just a longer delay between the summoning and the kill time. Now this one, because this isn't a hole right here, the wither stars do get pushed out, and the withers do create a lot of cobblestone when they're exploding. So I was able to put in some hoppers that the output would eventually get pushed into. The last few withers, you will have to go in and collect their nether stars, but initially we'll get some our output getting pushed into these hoppers, or at least some of it will get automatically picked up for you. And then one last change here is we have to kill off our skeletons that spawn. In the other ones, they'll die to the TNT quite quickly, but in this one here, I had to put a waterlogged bottom slab down there. That way the wither skeletons, they stand low enough that they'll suffocate in the bedrock. And again, you do want it to be waterlogged. That way there's no any chance for things to explode. These hoppers are waterlogged. All of this is waterlogged floors. Whereas on this side, it's all waterlogged floors except for immediately beside our TNT dispenser, where I've got solid blocks just to make this as explosion proof as possible, especially with the larger batches of withers. This is one of the first things that might blow up, so I'm just giving it as much protection as possible. And again, that's why I say if you're doing this on a server where you don't have the option of going into peaceful mode or running kill commands, don't run more than 10 withers at a time. So that's the kind of general use instructions for this farm. Again, collecting the experience points is very important, or the withers will not get into their correct locations. And you can see over here, that's where I did all my testing and designing. And over here is all the different versions of the farm that I came up with. So if you wanted to play around with things, you could come over here. These first couple, they're fairly straightforward. All you'd have to do is, I'll come over here, sign, place your soul sand, press the button to dispense, and the wither would be summoned, and then you would press this button and the TNT would launch. So you could do that. Very, very basic version, not all of that mess over there, but I did want an automatic AFK version for lots of bulk wither killing. But if you've only got a couple withers, then that's much easier. And then as we move down the line here, I was trying to make the automation work. I wouldn't trust any of these really long term, but you could play around with them, except for these last three. These three are the ones that I'm showing you over here. So if you care to poke around, I did have some really nasty redstone kind of nightmares over here along the process. And my finished product is still a little messy, but like I mentioned, there's a deadline for how long you'll be able to build the TNT versions, so I want to get the video out here without spending too much time making it any prettier. Let's go into a bit of the mechanics for how this is working. Once our soul sand gets pushed over here, this torch is going to deactivate, and I'm just using a dispenser with some powdered snow, so that only when I'm not getting a double pulse with any of these things, I'll only ever get a single pulse from our observers. And so that is going to trigger this observer, which again, we're going to send that single pulse around to retract our soul sand. And that's going to come down, get powered through our observers to this block, and all our pistons to push up. And then again, we have a power source that's going to power our soul sand here, which will deactivate this torch, which will power this dispenser, and we get just a single pulse from our observer over there to fire off the skulls. Then coming back around this way, our observer here with our single pulse is going to trigger this dropper, which will fire off into our other dropper over there. So this dropper here is our counter for the withers. So the number of items you have in here is the number of withers you will spawn before your kill cycle starts. So once this empties, this dropper empties, we will have a torch turn on and create some power here, and that's going to prevent this from lighting up, which means that the system will not push more soul sand up. If I do that, you'll see that that's lit up, and even if this torch was off, I have the switch turned off over there, it wouldn't power. Now our TNT is going to start any second now. See, we had this torch would have turned on and powered our dispenser here, which would have given ourselves a nice little one pulse trigger for our hopper clock. So our hopper clock over here is just a little timer system. And I've got 30 items in here. And that provides us the correct amount of time by the time they've moved over here and come back for a wither to summon, or the other withers to have died off before the next process happens. So once we have the first 30 block timer occur, this torch will turn on, and it will push our piston, which will allow our 12 items in here, which is the number of TNT we're firing, to move over to our dropper. And then we've just got a slow little dropper timer happening here. So if I let's add a couple more in here so we can see it. You can see we've got our slow dropper timer, and that's firing the items off into this hopper, which would be locked by our redstone block there and end up back in there. Now our pulse extender here will ensure that only after our TNT is finished firing, this dispenser gets triggered, which will again trigger our timer so that we have our countdown for how long it takes the withers to die before this line gets powered or depowered, and we're now allowed to continue on again. So that's just running up there to fire off our dispensers, and you see I've got a redstone torch on top of here, so that's powering this block for our dispenser, and I've got 2 droppers with the TNT being pushed up. Now this obsidian down here is just a little bit extra blast protection for the withers, so that we don't have redstone dust getting exploded, taking a little bit less damage while AFK. Okay, and then now the last thing that's happening here is I have this observer just watching this pulsing dust. So with 12 TNT, we'll have 24 pulses come through, so that, technically this system would accept 24 withers at a time. And I have run it like that for long term, but there is the chance when you start getting lots of withers that they'll start spontaneously destroying some of our solid blocks that we need. And if that happens at just the wrong time when we're summoning a wither, you could start getting them escaping, or their weird large explosions could start destroying our redstone dust. And so that's why I'm saying keep it at 10 withers if you're going to be walking away from this, and if you're in a world where you don't have control of commands, or you don't mind having this whole thing blow up and having to fight about 10 withers at a time, then go for it. But if you're playing on a server with a bunch of other people, play it safe and keep it to the lower numbers. Okay. So that is, that's going to be the same thing over here. You got your timer, you got your TNT counter, you got your dispensers here that count off the number of withers that you got going on. We have our observer that's going to do the reset for us. It's basically all the same thing, except for our pistons we're using as our locker. Just the lock is a little different. But there'll be a wool download and a structure, so you'll be able to see that. And over here, the only difference is we have removed the whole TNT system. So instead of the observer to reset our dispensers that count withers, I've taken our power line from our main clock here, so that when it's ready to be reset, we're just turning off this torch. So when this torch would send power through, we have a little comparator clock, and this would just keep pulsing. So it would probably move an entire dropper's worth of items over, but do not put any more than 4 items in your dropper here. They just when they take suffocation damage, they start destroying all this cobblestone fast, and you will start getting them escaping quickly. So only 4 at a time is what you can do with this. But otherwise, it's basically the same thing, just without the TNT. And I'll show you. So the number of items has now become 3 stacks and 27, rather than just 30. So obviously, suffocation is much, much slower, but this one will work in 1.19.70, or rather, you could build this one after 1.19.70. If you've built the others, they'll continue to work, but we won't be able to go through the process of removing these 2 pieces of obsidian. So the withers are not going to be relog proof, and they're going to start taking suffocation damage. While the beauty of these here is, they'll only take the TNT damage, and they'll be relog proof. So if something crashes or the server restarts while you're AFK, you shouldn't have any withers escape. I would suggest you don't continue running this thing, and you make sure that everything is good and that the withers are all dead, and you don't need to manually fire off all your TNT to kill them before you just continue going after you restart. But it will be relog proof. Anyways, I believe that is all of the how it works and how to use it instructions that I can think of. So now I'll skip over to the build tutorial, and we'll see you over there. Just a little word of warning, I guess, before some of you guys tune out. We're dealing with withers. Buyer beware, use caution, and keep this away from anything that you care about. It's not my fault if you blow up your world. You're playing with withers, okay? Alright, let's skip over to the build tutorial. One quick thing before I do let you go to the tutorial again. I did finish recording the tutorial, but I realized that I hadn't mentioned a few names, so I'm going to insert this while maybe you people are still watching. So the first is Senti, and Senti came up with the TNT dispensing in below their feet through bedrock. They did have a larger bedrock cage in their setup, but that's where I first saw this concept of using TNT to kill the wither, and proof that it doesn't take a lot of TNT to do if you can get it in the right spot. So big thanks to Senti for coming up with that. And then also Rufus Atticus, I'll link his video as well. He's got a lot of information on how the withers spawn and the requirements and which direction they move. His video focuses on natural formations where you can suffocate the wither, but it is something that I watched a few times before I started using these gateways for the past year or so, just in small little bits. So those are the 2 people that I would like to thank for their information and their concepts, which kind of got me started down this path. And then also SP, he's got a channel as well where he does a lot of stuff with beacons. They've been kind of pushing me, encouraging me to actually complete this. So they've kind of been helping me get some motivation. Anyways, I'll let the video resume and we will go through building that. You know what, I've been lying to you guys. I've been saying that I'm going to get to the build tutorial, and that I keep interrupting you, and I'm doing it again. I've finished doing my video editing, and the video was an hour and a half long. So I'll put the build tutorial in a second video, and I'll make sure that the cards are linked to it. I'll be uploading them at the same time, but that second video will be purely the build tutorial, so that if you have any troubles with the structuras or the world downloads, I'll go through things in painful detail there. But I did one last thing. As I was going through all this, I realized that perhaps a very, very simple option would be worthwhile for those of you you don't need a full AFK setup and hundreds of stars. You're just looking for maybe 10 stars or 20 stars. This is much, much simpler. Now, I didn't come up with this method of placing the soul sand and having the heads auto-dispensed. I can't find who it was that had come up with it, so if somebody recognizes it, if they could mention it in the comments, then I'll definitely put it in the video description. But this little setup here, because it's simpler, it's a little bit faster, it's built for the suffocation. So we have our bedrock down there still, and I have a little dropper here with 6 soul sand in it, because we can have up to 6 withers at a time in this thing. So once all 6 have been summoned, our power goes away and it won't allow any more to be summoned. But when that does happen, you can't just immediately start over again. You're going to have to manually move these things back down to get ready to start. And you'll have to climb up here, collect your experience point between every wither batch, and come down and collect your stars. So this one's much more manual. If you forget to do a step, you might accidentally release a wither. So just remember, always start with no soul sand here, and come in here and double check that this is nothing's wrong in here before you start the next batch. So a lot of the safeties are missing, a lot of the automation is missing. It's only going to stop you at however many items you've put in here. So 5 would be safe, 6 is the fastest and the max that I would feel comfortable with. So I'll just run through the 6, and you should see that the last one just barely summons before the first one finishes summoning in, which will mean that goodness, that's loud. It'll mean that there'll be no chance for this cobblestone to have broken from the first wither, so our 6th one should fit in. That's a little sketchy on tightness, so if you're having any kind of a lag or the placing isn't quite so smooth for you, start with lower numbers and work your way up to find what works for you. I cannot hear myself at all. Definitely gotta turn that down for you guys. But, goodness, I can't deal with that. Anyways. They're all dying. Now, before you start again, remove this soul sand. That way, as soon as you pick up your items and put them back in here, they'll not immediately summon a wither. And you'll want to come up in here, collect your experience, and then maybe come down and grab your stars. Make sure that nothing is missing, that we still have all of our blocks in place. Okay, I do need to show you one thing here that I realized isn't visible, is we have a torch right here on this piston. So we'll get 1 pulse coming from that observer, which will power this piston, and that quick little pulse is going to transfer through this torch, so we still get just the single pulse all the way up. So I believe that is only thing not visible immediately. We just have a comparator here powering this block for this torch to push that. But otherwise everything is visible here, so I don't really need to go into any more of a guide on this. It's just this same cage that we are going to be going through in the build tutorial video. Just one last simple little thing. If you wanted to do 1 wither at a time, you could skip all of this and just place them and let the wither suffocate, and just use this as automation for your blocks that you would need to replace in there, and a little safety box to keep the skulls from destroying everything. So, that is what I have for you this week. If you're interested in actually building this, like I mentioned, there's a build tutorial that'll help walk you through kind of following the structura and some of the specific points of these, if you wanted to have a look at it and just make sure you've got everything straight.